Most people think change begins with motivation. They believe that if they can just feel inspired enough, disciplined enough, or serious enough, then everything will finally click. They imagine that one day they will wake up with enough energy to become a completely different person. They will suddenly eat better, work harder, stop procrastinating, exercise every day, wake up early, stay focused, and stay consistent forever. But real life rarely works that way. That is where tiny habits begins. BJ Fogg challenges one of the biggest myths in self-improvement, the idea that transformation requires huge effort. He argues that people often fail not because they are lazy or weak, but because they are trying to change in a way that goes against how behavior actually works. They set goals that are too large, depend too much on unstable motivation, and then blame themselves when they cannot sustain the pressure. This is a powerful shift because it removes a lot of unnecessary shame. If you have ever started a new routine and then quit after a few days, it does not automatically mean you lack character. It may mean your strategy was flawed from the beginning. Many behavior changes fail because they are designed around intensity instead of simplicity. Fogg's answer is surprisingly simple. Start tiny. Start so small that the habit feels almost impossible to fail. Instead of trying to do a full workout, do 2 push-ups. Instead of committing to a long meditation session, take 1 deep breath. Instead of reading for an hour, open the book and read 1 paragraph. The point is not that tiny actions are enough forever. The point is that they are enough to begin. This may sound too easy, and that is exactly why many people overlook it. We often assume that if a method feels small, it must be weak. But tiny habits argues the opposite. Small actions are powerful because they are repeatable. They reduce resistance. They build confidence. They create consistency. And consistency matters more than intensity when it comes to lasting change. The book's core message is deeply encouraging. You do not need to force your life forward with constant pressure. You need to work with human nature instead of against it. That means designing behaviors that are easy to do, emotionally rewarding, and connected to your existing routines. For anyone building a better life, this is a refreshing way to think. You do not need more self-judgment. You need a better design. Tiny Habits is really a book about making change feel natural instead of painful, practical instead of dramatic, and sustainable instead of exhausting. At the center of the book is BJ Fogg's behavior model, a simple framework for understanding why people do what they do. According to the model, behavior happens when 3 things come together at the same time: motivation, ability, and a prompt. If one of these is missing, the behavior is much less likely to happen. Let's break that down. Motivation is the desire to do something. Ability is how easy or difficult the behavior is. A prompt is the trigger that reminds you to act. Many people only focus on motivation. They try to get excited enough to change. But Fogg explains that motivation is unreliable. It rises and falls constantly. On some days you feel inspired. On other days you feel tired, stressed, distracted, or overwhelmed. That means if your habit depends on high motivation, it is built on unstable ground. The smarter path is to increase ability by making the behavior easier and then use a prompt so the action has a clear starting point. This is one of the most practical lessons in the book. If you want a behavior to happen, do not keep asking how to become more motivated. Ask how to make the behavior simpler. Ask how to reduce friction. Ask how to make starting almost automatic. For example, imagine someone wants to build a journaling habit. If the goal is to write 2 pages every night, that may require energy, time, and mental focus. On a difficult day, the habit feels too heavy. But if the habit becomes writing 1 sentence after brushing your teeth, the ability goes up dramatically. It becomes much easier to succeed. The prompt also matters. A prompt tells your brain when to act. Without a prompt, even a good intention stays vague. You say you want to stretch more, but when exactly? If the prompt is after I make coffee, I will do 1 stretch, the habit suddenly has a place in real life. This model changes the way you think about behavior. Instead of blaming yourself for inconsistency, you begin asking smarter questions. Is the behavior too hard? Is the prompt unclear? Am I relying too much on motivation? That is a huge upgrade in thinking. It turns self-improvement from a moral struggle into a design challenge. And that is one of the book's biggest strengths. It does not just tell you to do better. It shows you how behavior actually works, and once you understand that, change becomes much more manageable. Fogg presents this as the basis of his behavior design approach, centered on motivation, ability, and prompts. Content reference, oocyte, 0. Index equals 0. One of the most important ideas in tiny habits is that small behavior changes are not just a beginner step. They are a smart long-term strategy. Fogg argues that when a behavior is tiny, it becomes easier to do consistently. And consistency is what allows habits to take root. This matters because the biggest enemy of a new habit is not difficulty in the middle. It is resistance at the start. That moment when you think, I should work out, but I do not feel like it. I should write, but I am too tired. I should meditate, but I will do it later. Most habits are lost in that first moment of internal friction. Tiny habits reduce that friction. When the action is small enough, the brain has fewer reasons to resist. 2 push-ups feels manageable. 1 deep breath feels manageable. Opening a document and writing 1 sentence feels manageable. These small actions slip past the mental wall that usually stops us. And once you start, something interesting happens. You often do more than the minimum. 2 push-ups may become 10. 1 sentence may become a paragraph. 1 minute of cleaning may become a short productive reset. But the book is careful here. The victory is not doing more. The victory is showing up. That is a subtle but important point. If you start judging yourself only by whether you go beyond the tiny version, you recreate the same pressure that made habits fail before. The tiny version must still count as success. That keeps the habit emotionally safe and sustainable. This approach works because habits are built through repetition, not through impressive beginnings. Many people can do something hard for 3 days. The challenge is doing something simple for 3 months. Tiny actions create that possibility. There is also an identity advantage here. Every time you complete a tiny habit, you prove something to yourself. You become the kind of person who follows through. You become someone who starts. You begin collecting evidence that change is possible. That may not feel dramatic in the moment, but over time it becomes powerful. Big transformations often look small at the beginning. They start with behaviors so simple that people almost dismiss them. But what matters is not how impressive the habit looks on day 1. What matters is whether it survives long enough to become real. This is the genius of starting tiny. It respects the psychology of the human brain. It accepts that momentum grows from action, not from pressure. And it gives you a way to begin, even on low-energy days, without waiting for the perfect mood. A habit becomes much easier to remember when it is attached to something you already do. This is one of the most useful ideas in the book. Fogg calls this the anchor. An anchor is an existing routine that becomes the trigger for a new tiny behavior. Instead of saying, I will meditate sometime tomorrow, you tie the behavior to something stable. After I brush my teeth, I will take 1 deep breath. After I sit at my desk, I will write 1 sentence. After I pour my morning coffee, I will stretch once. The old routine becomes the launch point for the new one. This is powerful because one of the biggest problems with new habits is vagueness. People want change, but they do not assign it a reliable place in the day. That leaves too much room for forgetting, delaying, or negotiating. An anchor solves that by giving the new habit a home. The best anchors are routines that already happen consistently. Brushing your teeth, sitting in the car, opening your laptop, closing the front door, or getting into bed. These events are dependable. When you connect a tiny behavior to them, the habit becomes easier to remember and easier to repeat. The anchor also reduces the need for decision-making. You no longer ask, when should I do this? The answer is built in. That matters because habits become fragile when they depend on repeated choices. The more you have to decide, the more likely you are to skip. There is also something psychologically elegant about this method. You are not trying to force a completely separate routine into your life. You are layering a tiny new behavior onto a pattern that already exists. That makes the habit feel more natural and less disruptive. Of course, the match matters. A good anchor should fit the behavior. If the anchor is inconsistent, the habit may disappear. If the anchor happens, but the context is wrong, the behavior may feel awkward. The key is to choose a stable moment that makes the action easy. This lesson is extremely practical for anyone building routines. If a habit keeps failing, the issue may not be the habit itself. It may be that the behavior has no reliable anchor. Once you give it one, the habit suddenly becomes more concrete. The beauty of this method is that it turns everyday life into a structure for change. You do not need a completely new schedule. You need to use your existing schedule more intelligently. That is a recurring theme in tiny habits. Behavior change works better when it fits real life instead of fighting it. One of the most distinctive ideas in tiny habits is that emotion creates habits faster than repetition alone. In other words, habits stick when the brain feels successful. Fogg emphasizes celebration because he believes positive emotion is what helps the brain encode a behavior as something worth remembering. This is very different from the way many people approach self-improvement. They assume that improvement comes from pressure, criticism, and harsh self-evaluation. They think that being hard on themselves will make them more disciplined. But often it does the opposite. It makes the process emotionally heavy, which increases resistance and reduces consistency. Fogg's idea is simple. Right after you complete a tiny habit, celebrate. That celebration can be small and private. You might say yes to yourself, smile, nod, raise a fist, or simply pause and feel good for a moment. The exact method matters less than the emotional effect. The brain needs a sense of success. This may sound strange at first. Some people hear it and think it feels childish or artificial. But the deeper logic is strong. The brain is always learning from emotion. When a new behavior feels good immediately, it becomes easier to repeat. When it feels like punishment or pressure, the brain starts resisting it. That means celebration is not a cute extra. It is part of the method. It helps turn a tiny action into a positive experience. And when positive emotion becomes linked to the behavior, the habit grows faster. This also helps explain why many people fail with habits even when they choose reasonable goals. They complete the behavior, but instantly move the finish line. They think, that was nothing, I should have done more. Or they focus on how far they still have to go. That emotional pattern weakens the experience. Instead of reinforcing success, it reinforces insufficiency. Tiny habits offers a healthier approach. Recognize the win. Let the brain feel it. That does not mean becoming arrogant or pretending a tiny action is a miracle. It means respecting the fact that progress grows through positive reinforcement. This lesson has a bigger implication too. Sustainable change feels different from self-punishment. It feels lighter. It feels possible. It feels rewarding enough that you want to return to it tomorrow. That emotional design is one of the book's smartest contributions. Many people focus only on the mechanics of habits. Fogg reminds us that feelings matter. A behavior becomes part of your life more quickly when the brain learns to associate it with success, not struggle. Fogg's published description of the method highlights using positive emotion and celebrating small successes to help habits stick. Content reference, Oasite, 1, index equals 1. One of the reasons this book feels so practical is that it refuses to build behavior change on motivation alone. Fogg understands that motivation fluctuates. Some mornings you feel determined. Other mornings you feel mentally foggy, emotionally drained, or simply distracted by life. That means a good habit system must still work when motivation is low. In fact, the real test of a behavior design is not whether it works on your best day. It is whether it still works on your worst ordinary day. This is where tiny habits shine. When a behavior is extremely small, it stays possible even when energy drops. You may not feel like a long workout, but 2 push-ups still feels doable. You may not feel like writing for an hour, but opening the document and typing 1 sentence still feels within reach. This matters more than people realize. Habits become strong when they survive low-energy moments. If a habit only happens when you feel motivated, it is not really stable yet. It is mood-dependent. The goal is to design behaviors that can continue through fatigue, busyness, travel, stress, and emotional fluctuation. This also protects against the all-or-nothing mindset. Many people treat a low-energy day as proof that the habit is broken. They miss the bigger picture. The job of the habit is not always to produce maximum output. Sometimes the job is simply to keep the pattern alive. That is a very mature way to think about consistency. On some days, your best performance may be small. But small still counts. In fact, small may be exactly what keeps you connected to the routine long enough to return stronger later. Designing for low-energy days also makes you more honest about reality. You stop pretending you will always feel strong, and you start building habits that can survive your actual life. That makes your system more compassionate and more effective. The deeper lesson is that behavior change should not require constant emotional intensity. A good system respects human variability. It allows progress even when life is messy. That is why tiny habits feels so sustainable. It is not built for fantasy conditions. It is built for real people with uneven days, limited energy, and competing demands. And that may be one of the biggest reasons the method works. It does not ask you to become superhuman. It asks you to become strategic. A major theme running through the book is that ease matters. People often assume that hard things are more meaningful, so they design habits that require too much effort, time, planning, or emotional readiness. Then they wonder why the habit never settles in. Fogg pushes in the opposite direction. He wants you to make the behavior easier. Simplify the action. Simplify the setup. Simplify the path to starting. The easier a behavior feels, the more likely it is to happen. This is not laziness. It is smart design. Human behavior is highly sensitive to friction. A few extra steps can be enough to stop a good habit. A few removed obstacles can be enough to make the habit happen automatically. If you want to read more, place the book where you naturally sit. If you want to exercise in the morning, put your clothes out the night before. If you want to eat healthier, prepare the better option before hunger takes over. If you want to write, reduce the number of actions between the idea and the keyboard. The same principle works in reverse for bad habits. Increase friction. Make the unwanted behavior harder to start. Log out of distracting apps. Put snacks out of sight. Keep the phone in another room. Delete shortcuts that invite mindless behavior. This is powerful because it shifts self-improvement away from constant internal struggle. Instead of trying to resist temptation every moment, you shape the environment so that better actions require less effort. Many people overlook this because it feels too simple. But simplicity is the point. Habits grow through repetition, and repetition is much easier when the behavior is easy to begin. Even a good intention can fail if the path is too inconvenient. This idea also fits perfectly with the broader message of tiny habits. Behavior change works best when you respect human nature. People move toward what feels easy, familiar, and available. Rather than pretending otherwise, you can use that truth to your advantage. When you reduce friction, you are not making the habit less valuable. You are making it more realistic. And realistic habits are the ones that survive. One of the most refreshing ideas in the book is that growth should happen naturally. Fogg does not tell you to start tiny for a week and then aggressively scale up on a strict schedule. Instead, he suggests letting habits expand when it feels natural. This is important because many people sabotage themselves by turning every success into a demand for more. They finally build a tiny, consistent behavior and then immediately pile on pressure. One walk becomes a full training plan. One paragraph becomes a daily writing quota. One clean meal becomes a harsh diet. The system that was working gets crushed by ambition. Tiny Habits offers a different mindset. Keep the tiny version as the baseline. Let extra effort be optional. If you feel like doing more, great. If not, the tiny habit still counts. This keeps the routine emotionally safe and prevents the habit from becoming something the brain dreads. That safety matters. A habit grows best when it feels doable and positive. Once the brain starts associating it with pressure and guilt, resistance returns. That is why so many routines collapse after a strong start. The person made the habit too heavy too quickly. Natural growth creates a healthier relationship with progress. It teaches you to value continuity over intensity. It allows the habit to become part of your identity before it becomes a major performance target. This approach also builds trust in yourself. You stop using motivation spikes to make unrealistic promises. Instead, you create a reliable baseline that supports long-term development. Over time, that baseline can lead to surprisingly big results precisely because it is sustainable. This is especially useful for self-improvement audiences because many people are stuck in a cycle of extremes. They either go all in or do nothing. Tiny Habits breaks that cycle by showing that growth can be steady, light, and durable. The deeper wisdom here is that not all progress needs to feel dramatic. The best kind of progress often feels simple enough to repeat. And repeated simplicity over time becomes transformation. Although the book is mostly known for building good habits, its ideas also help explain how to weaken bad ones. Fogg's framework encourages you to stop treating unwanted behaviors like mysterious flaws and start viewing them as behaviors with structure. A bad habit usually survives because it is easy, prompted by something reliable and emotionally rewarding in the moment. If you want to untangle it, you need to work on those same elements. First, look at the prompt. What triggers the behavior? Is it boredom, stress, time of day, a specific place, or another routine? Second, look at ability. Is the bad habit simply too easy? Third, look at the emotional payoff. What does the behavior give you right away? Relief, stimulation, escape, comfort, numbness, or distraction. Once you see the structure, you can begin redesigning it. You can remove or weaken prompts. You can make the unwanted behavior harder to do. And you can create alternative routines that meet the same emotional need in a healthier way. For example, if someone constantly checks their phone when work becomes uncomfortable, the deeper issue may not be the phone itself. It may be that distraction provides quick emotional relief. A replacement routine could be standing up, breathing, walking for 1 minute, or doing one small piece of the task before taking a break. The specific replacement matters less than understanding the need underneath the behavior. This approach is more compassionate than pure self-criticism, but it is also more effective. Shame usually makes bad habits worse because it creates more stress, and stress often drives the same behavior again. Structural change works better than moral panic. That does not mean change is always easy. Some bad habits are deeply rooted. But even then, the framework helps. Instead of feeling trapped, you begin asking useful questions. What is making this behavior likely? What can I reduce? What can I redesign? That shift matters because it turns behavior change into something practical. You may not control every urge instantly, but you can change the conditions that make the habit stronger or weaker. In that sense, Tiny Habits is not only a book about building better routines. It is also a book about removing unnecessary struggle by understanding how behavior is built in the first place. One of the quiet strengths of the book is the way it changes your relationship with identity. Many people think identity must change first before behavior can change. They say things like, I am not a disciplined person, I have always been disorganized, or I am just bad at consistency. Those labels become heavy, and eventually they start acting like instructions. Tiny Habits offers another path. Identity can change through small repeated action. Every time you complete a tiny behavior, you are sending yourself a message. You are becoming someone who follows through, someone who notices progress, someone who can build a routine. This matters because large goals can sometimes make people feel smaller. They are constantly measuring the gap between where they are and where they want to be. Tiny habits shrink that gap. They create immediate evidence of movement. That evidence slowly changes self-perception. When someone does 2 push-ups every day, it may not look impressive from the outside. But internally, something important is happening. They are becoming a person who does not completely break the promise to themselves. That may sound minor, but it is psychologically huge. Most people do not lose trust in themselves because they aim low. They lose trust because they repeatedly aim too high, fail to sustain it, and then reinforce the story that they cannot change. Tiny habits interrupts that cycle. It gives you a way to succeed consistently enough that your self-image starts improving. This also connects with celebration. When you acknowledge even a small success, you strengthen the emotional connection between the action and the identity behind it. You are not just completing a task. You are building a more capable sense of self. Over time, this becomes powerful. The person who begins with 1 sentence may eventually write daily. The person who starts with 1 stretch may become someone who exercises regularly. The change looks small at first, but identity often moves before visible results fully catch up. That is one reason the method works so well for self-improvement. It does not ask you to pretend you are already transformed. It lets you become transformed through repetition. In practical terms, this means you should respect your small wins more than you probably do. They are not random. They are shaping the kind of person you believe yourself to be. When you step back from the full book, a handful of major lessons stand out clearly. First, behavior change does not need to begin with high motivation. Motivation is unreliable, so the better strategy is to make behaviors easier and give them clear prompts. Second, small actions are not weak. They're effective because they reduce resistance and make consistency possible. The goal is not to impress yourself at the beginning. The goal is to create a pattern that survives. Third, habits become easier to remember when they are attached to existing routines. A strong anchor gives the new behavior a natural place in your day. Fourth, positive emotion matters. When you celebrate a success, even a tiny one, the brain is more likely to encode the behavior as something worth repeating. Fifth, a habit should be designed to work even on low-energy days. If the routine only happens when you feel inspired, it is still fragile. Sixth, reducing friction is one of the smartest ways to improve behavior. Make good habits easier. Make bad habits harder. Seventh, growth should happen naturally. Keep the tiny version as the baseline and let bigger effort emerge without turning the habit into a burden. And finally, identity changes through repetition. Every tiny action becomes proof that you are capable of following through and becoming more consistent. Together, these lessons create a very different model of self-improvement. Instead of forcing yourself into dramatic change, you work with psychology, simplicity, and emotion. You stop chasing perfection and start building patterns. That is why Tiny Habits stands out. It makes personal change feel humane. It respects the reality that people are busy, inconsistent, emotional, and imperfect. And rather than demanding that you become someone else first, it gives you a method for becoming better through small actions repeated over time. The lasting message of Tiny Habits is simple but powerful. Real change often begins at a size that feels almost too small to matter. That is exactly why it works. We live in a world that constantly praises intensity. Big goals, big routines, big transformation. But most people do not need more pressure. They need a method they can actually live with. They need something repeatable, emotionally rewarding, and strong enough to survive ordinary life. That is what BJ Fogg offers. He shows that when you reduce the behavior, connect it to a reliable anchor, and celebrate success, you create conditions where change becomes easier instead of harder. You make progress feel natural. And over time, Those tiny behaviors do something bigger than improve a routine. They change your confidence. They change your self-story. They change the way you respond to difficulty. You stop seeing self-improvement as a cycle of guilt and extreme effort. You start seeing it as a design process. That is a liberating idea. It means you do not need to wait for the perfect mood, the perfect week, or the perfect version of yourself. You can begin now at a very small scale and let that beginning grow. So the real challenge of this book is not to do something heroic. It is to do something tiny and actually repeat it. One action, one anchor, one small success, and then another. Because when the behavior is simple enough to survive, it can eventually become part of who you are. And that is how small changes really do change everything.